Welcome to the Tax Cases channel. In many assessments, the assessing officer tries to wear the shoe of the businessman. There are comments in the order which questions the business decisions. Is it the duty of the assessing officers to comment on the business decisions or do a correct tax computation? An analysis of a case law on a contract for business reorganization and the adventure of the assessing officer into its correctness. Kindly subscribe the channel and like the video. In the Supreme Court of India, Civil Appellate Jurisdiction, Shivraj Gupta versus Commissioner of Income Tax, Delhi, 4. The present appeal relating to assessment year 95-96 is by one Shri Shivraj Gupta, who was the Chairman and Managing Director of Central Distillery and Breweries Limited, which had a unit in Meerut manufacturing beer and Indian-made foreign liquor. The facts leading to an appreciation of the issues raised in these appeals are as follows. By a memorandum of understanding dated 13th April 1994 made between the appellant and three group companies of Shah Wallace Company Group, the appellant, his wife, son, daughter-in-law and two daughters were the registered holders of 1,86,109 equity shares of 10 rupees each, constituting 57.29% of the paid up equity share capital of the company. It was listed in Bombay and Delhi stock exchanges. The breakup of the shares held by the family members of the appellant and the appellant himself are as follows. Shivraj Gupta 38,999 shares, Jayant Gupta, appellant's son, 44,658 shares, Rupa Gupta, appellant's daughter-in-law, 53,911 shares, Pushpa Gupta, appellant's wife, 3,303 shares, Avanti Pandit, appellant's daughter, 5,541 shares, Aarti Kirloskar, appellant's daughter, 2,760 shares, on a total 1,86,109 shares. The said MOU recites that the company employed in its factory 350 employees and around 25 staff and other officers in its other offices. The MOU then refers to a direction of the Supreme Court which was made by an order dated 11th March 1994, which made it clear that the company's manufacturing activity at the plant at Meerut was suspended until a secondary effluent treatment plant is installed and made operative by the company. This led to the sale of this controlling block of shares, which was sold at the price of 30 rupees per share, when the listed market price of the share was only 3 rupees per share. It is stated in the said MOU that the entire sale consideration of 55,83,270 has since been paid by the SWC group to Shri Gupta, as a result of which Shri Gupta has irrevocably handed over physical possession, management and control of the said brewery and distillery of CDBL to a representative of the Shah Wallace Group on 10th February 1994. Among the things to be done under the MOU, it was made clear that the nominees of the SWC Group would be put in the saddle, that is, be made directors on or before 13th April 1994, so that they will constitute an absolute majority on the board of the company. Importantly, both Shri Shivraj Gupta and his son Shri Jayant Gupta, who together with his wife is the major shareholder of the family, will resign as chairman and managing director and as joint managing director respectively of CDBL by 13th April 1994. Under clause 7 of the said MOU, personal guarantees given by the appellant and his son to UCO Bank, IFCI, ICICI and IREDA for loans amounting to 8.44 crores will be indemnified against all claims, actions, etc. in respect thereof. By a deed of covenant dated 13th April 1994, the MOU signed on the same day was reiterated, and it was then stated in recitals 3 and 4 as follows. Over the past years, Mr. Shivraj Gupta has acquired considerable knowledge, skill, expertise and specialization in liquor business. In furtherance of the purchase of the said shares, SWC have requested Mr. Shivraj Gupta to give a restrictive covenant to and in favor of SWC for not carrying on directly or indirectly any manufacturing or marketing activities whatsoever relating to Indian made foreign liquor or beer for a period of 10 years from the date thereof, which Mr. Gupta has agreed to give for the consideration of a non-competition fee of 6.6 crores to be paid by SWC to Mr. Gupta. The deed of covenant is a short document containing two clauses which are set out as follows. In consideration of the sum of 6 crores paid by SWC to Mr. Gupta as an advance against the aforesaid non-competition fee of 6.6 crores, the receipt whereof Mr. Gupta hereby admits and acknowledges. Mr. Gupta hereby irrevocably agrees, covenants, and undertakes that with effect from the date of these presents, Mr. Gupta will not start or engage himself directly or indirectly or provide any service, assistance, or support of any nature whatsoever to or in relation to the manufacturing, dealing, and supplying or marketing of Indian made foreign liquor and or beer. The balance amount of 60 lakhs will be paid by SWC to Mr. Gupta on 31st October 1994. This covenant shall remain in full force and effect for a period of 10 years from the date of these presents, and this covenant will be absolutely and irrevocably binding on Mr. Gupta. The bone of contention in this appeal is whether the said deed of covenant can be said to contain a restrictive covenant as a result of which payment is made to the appellant, or whether it is in fact part of a sham transaction which, in the guise of being a separate deed of covenant, is really in the nature of payment received by the appellant as compensation for terminating his management of CDBL, in which case it would be taxable under Section 28 Clause 2 Subclause A of the Income Tax Act. Section 28 Clause 2 Clause A reads as follows: any compensation or other payment due to or received by A. any person by whatever name called, managing the whole or substantially the whole of the affairs of an Indian company, at or in connection with the termination of his management or the modification of the terms and conditions relating thereto. By an order dated 31st March 1998, the assessing officer held that despite the fact that the appellant owned a concern, namely 1. Messrs. Maltings Limited, which also manufactured IMFL, being a loss-making concern, no real competition could be envisaged between a giant, namely the SWC Group, and this loss-making dwarf, as a result of which the huge amount paid under the deed of covenant cannot be said to be an amount paid in respect of a restrictive covenant as to non-competition. It was further held that the son of the appellant was not paid any such non-compete fee or amount, despite the fact that he also resigned from his position as joint managing director. It was also held that this was a lump sum payment with no reason as to why such a huge amount of 6.6 crores was being paid. It was also found that there was no penalty clause to enforce the performance of obligations under the aforesaid deed of covenant, as a result of which, applying the judgment in McDowell and Company Limited versus CTO, the deed of covenant was held to be a colorable device to evade tax that is payable under Section 28 Clause 2 Subclause A of the IT Act 1961. As a result thereof, this amount was then brought to tax under the aforesaid provision. An appeal from the assessing officer to the learned Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals was dismissed. When it came before the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, the learned accountant member differed with the learned judicial member. The learned accountant member held that the two deeds would have to be read separately, and that revenue cannot challenge the business perception of the assessee. Further, it was held that there was no colorable device involved, and that, as a result, non-compete fee payable under the deed of covenant was not taxable under Section 28, Clause 2, Subclause A, or any other provision of the Income Tax Act. The learned judicial member, on the other hand, substantially agreed with the assessing officer, as a result of which he decided in favor of the revenue. A reference was then made to a third member, who was also a judicial member. The learned third member emphasized the fact that a share worth 3 rupees was sold to 30 rupees under the MOU, as a result of transfer of control of the CDBL. It cannot be said that these shares have been undervalued. Neither can it be said that there was any collusion or other sham transaction, as a result of which the amount of 6.6 crores has escaped income tax. He pointed out that by a letter dated 2nd April 1994, a penalty clause was provided for, in that out of the amount received by the assessee, an amount of 3 crores was to be deposited with the SWC group for 2 years under a public deposit scheme. It being made clear that in case there is any breach of the terms of the MOU resulting in loss, the amount of such loss will be deducted from this deposit. The result therefore was that the appeal stood allowed by a majority of 2:1 in the appellate tribunal. The revenue preferred an appeal under section 260 capital A of the Income Tax Act 1961 to the High Court. In its ground of appeal, the revenue framed the substantial questions of law that arose in the matter as follows. A. Whether the ITAT has correctly interpreted the provisions of section 28 clause 2 of the IT Act. Whether the learned ITAT was correct in holding that receipt of 6.6 crores by the respondent or assessee as non-competitive fee was a capital receipt under section 28 clause 4 of the Income Tax Act and not a revenue receipt as envisaged in section 28 clause 2 of the IT Act. C. Whether the learned ITAT failed to distinguish between nature of capital and nature of benefit in commercial sense in respect of amount of 6.6 crores received in view of restrictive covenant of deed dated 13th April 1994. D. Whether the learned judicial member of ITAT was correct in recording his difference of opinion that receipt of 6.6 crores by respondent or assessee was actually a colorable exercise to evade tax and same was held to be taxable under section 28 clause 2 of the IT Act. By the impugned judgment of the Division Bench of the Delhi High Court dated 22nd December 2014, the Division Bench framed the following substantial questions of law. Whether on the facts and in the circumstances of the case, the amount of 6.6 crores received by the assessee from SWC is on account of handing over management and control of CDBL, which were earlier under the management and control of the assessee to SWC as terminal benefit and is taxable under section 28 clause 2 of the Income Tax Act, or same is exempt as capital receipt being non-competition fee by executing deed of covenant. After going through the MOU and the deed of covenant, both dated 13th April 1994 and copiously referring to the order of the assessing officer dated 31st March 98, the High Court agreed with the assessing officer and the first judicial member of the appellate tribunal, stating that the deed of covenant could not be read as a separate document and was not in its real avatar a non-compete fee at all. However, in its ultimate conclusion, disagreeing with the learned assessing officer and the minority judgment of the tribunal, the High Court went on to state that the said sum of 6.6 crores could not be brought to tax under section 28 clause 2 subclause A, but would have to be treated as a taxable capital gain in the hands of the appellant, being part of the full value of consideration paid for transfer of shares. In the Supreme Court proceedings, the learned senior advocates appearing on behalf of the appellant have taken us through the orders of the income tax authorities, the appellate tribunal, and the impugned judgment of the High Court. They raised as a preliminary submission the fact that under section 260A, it is only the substantial question of law that is framed that can be answered and no other. If some other question is to be answered, the court must first give notice of the same to both sides, hear them, pronounce a reasoned order, and thereafter frame another substantial question of law, which it may then answer. This procedure has not been followed in the present case, as it is clear that the substantial question of law framed did not contain within it the question as to whether the assessee can be taxed outside the provisions of section 28 clause 2A. The entire judgment is therefore vitiated and must be set aside on this ground alone. They relied on several judgments to buttress this contention. They then relied upon the judgment of the learned accountant member and of the third member in favor of the assessee and the reasoning therein, which according to them is unexceptionable and should have been followed by the High Court. They also cited judgments to show that prior to 1st April 2003, that is, before the introduction of Section 28, Clause 5A by Finance Act 2002, with effect from the aforesaid date, any sum received under an agreement for not carrying out any activity in relation to any business was taxed for the first time under this provision, and the provision, not being retrospective, would not apply to the facts of the present case. Learned senior advocate, appearing on behalf of the revenue, read the order of the assessing officer and the order of the first learned judicial member and adopted the reasoning contained therein. According to him, the High Court judgment correctly applied both McDowell and Vodafone International Holdings PV versus Union of India to arrive at the result which it arrived at, as it was clear that the amount of 6.6 crores that was received by the assessee was really in the nature of payment for the sale of shares. He also argued as an alternative that in any event it would fall under Section 28 Clause 2 Subclause A, as was correctly held by the learned assessing officer and the minority judgment of the appellate tribunal. Having heard learned counsel for both parties, Supreme Court is of the view that the appeal needs to be succeed first on the preliminary ground raised by the learned counsel for the appellant. Section 260A of the IT Act reads as follows. Appeal to High Court. An appeal shall lie to the High Court from every order passed in appeal by the appellate tribunal before the date of commencement of the National Tax Tribunal, if the High Court is satisfied that the case involves a substantial question of law. The Principal Chief Commissioner or Chief Commissioner or the Principal Commissioner or an assessee aggrieved by any order passed by the appellant tribunal may file an appeal to the High Court, and such appeal under this subsection shall be filed within 180 days from the date on which the order appealed against is received by the assessee or the Principal Chief Commissioner or Chief Commissioner or Principal Commissioner or Commissioner. C. In the form of a memorandum of appeal precisely stating therein the substantial question of law involved. Subsection 2A. The High Court may admit an appeal after the expiry of the period of 120 days, referred to in Clause A of subsection 2, if it is satisfied that there was sufficient cause for not filing the same within that period. Where the High Court is satisfied that a substantial question of law is involved in any case, it shall formulate that question. The appeal shall be heard only on the question so formulated, and the respondents shall at the hearing of the appeal be allowed to argue that the case does not involve such question, provided that nothing in this subsection shall be deemed to take away or abridge the power of the court to hear. For reasons to be recorded, the appeal on any other substantial question of law not formulated by it, if it is satisfied that the case involves such question. The High Court shall decide the question of law so formulated and deliver such judgment thereon, containing the grounds on which such decision is founded, and may award such cost as it deems fit. Subsection 6. The High Court may determine any issue which has not been determined by the appellate tribunal, or B. has been wrongly determined by the appellate tribunal by reason of a decision on such question of law as is referred to in subsection 1. Last, the subsection 7. Save as otherwise provided in this Act, the provisions of the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 relating to appeals to the High Court shall, as far as may be, apply in the case of appeals under this section. This provision, being modelled on a similar provision that is contained in Section 100 of the Code of Civil Procedure, makes it clear that the High Court's jurisdiction depends upon a substantial question of law being involved in the appeal before it. First and foremost, it shall formulate that question, and on the question so formulated, the High Court may then pronounce judgment, either by answering the question in the affirmative or negative, or by stating that the case at hand does not involve any such question. If the High Court wishes to hear the appeal on any other substantial question of law not formulated by it, it may, for reasons to be recorded, formulate and hear such questions if it is satisfied that the case involves such question. Section 260A, subsection 4. Under subsection 6, the High Court may also determine any issue which, though raised, has not been determined by the appellate tribunal or has been wrongly determined by the appellate tribunal by reason of a decision on a substantial question of law that is raised. In Kshitij Chandra Purkhet versus Santosh Kumar Purkhet, this court referred to section 100 of the Code of Civil Procedures and then stated, we would only add that A. It is the duty cast upon the High Court to formulate the substantial question of law involved in the case even at the initial stage, and B. That in exceptional cases at a later point of time, when the court exercises its jurisdiction under the proviso to subsection 5 of section 100 CPC, in formulating the substantial question of law, the opposite party should be put on notice thereon and should be given a fair or proper opportunity to meet the point. Proceeding to hear the appeal without formulating the substantial question of law involved in the appeal is illegal and is an abnegation or abdication of the duty cast on court. And even after the formulation of the substantial question of law, if a fair or proper opportunity is not afforded to the opposite side, it will amount to denial of natural justice. The above parameters within which the High Court has to exercise its jurisdiction under section 100 of the CPC should always be borne in mind. We are sorry to state that the above aspects are seldom borne in mind in many cases, and second appeals are entertained and are disposed of without conforming to the above discipline. This statement of law was followed in Danyanoba Bhaurao Shimede versus Marothi Bhaurao Marno. A recent decision of the court in Biswant Ghosh versus Govinda Ghosh has reiterated these principles in paragraph 16 as follows. Section 100 of the code lays down the provision with regard to second appeal, which reads as under. Subsection 1. Save as otherwise expressly provided in the body of this code or by any other law for the time being in force, an appeal shall lie to the High Court from every decree passed in appeal by any court subordinate to the High Court, if the High Court is satisfied that the case involves a substantial question of law. Subsection 2. An appeal may lie under this section from an appellate decree passed ex parte. In an appeal under this section, the memorandum of appeal shall precisely state the substantial question of law involved in the appeal. Where the High Court is dissatisfied that a substantial question of law is involved in any case, it shall formulate that question. Subsection 5. The appeal shall be heard on the question so formulated, and the respondent shall at the hearing of the appeal be allowed to argue that case does not involve such question, provided that nothing in this subsection shall be deemed to take away or abridge the power of the court to hear, for reasons to be recorded, the appeal on any other substantial questions of law not formulated by it, if it is satisfied that the case involves such question. From a bare reading of the aforesaid provision, it is manifestly clear that an appeal shall lie to the High Court from an appellate decree only if the High Court is satisfied that the case involves a substantial question of law. It further mandates that the memorandum of appeal precisely states the substantial question of law involved in the appeal. If such an appeal is filed, the High Court, while admitting or entertaining the appeal, must record its satisfaction and formulate the substantial question of law involved in the appeal. The appeal shall then be heard on the questions so formulated, and the respondent shall be allowed to argue only on those substantial questions of law. However, proviso to this section empowers the court to hear on any substantial question of law not formulated after recording reasons. It can be seen that the substantial question of law that was raised by the High Court did not contain any question as to whether the non-compete fee could be taxed under any provision other than section 28 clause 2 clause A of Income Tax Act. Without giving an opportunity to the parties followed by the reasons for framing any other question of law as to the taxability of such amount as a capital receipt in the hands of the assessee, the High Court answered the substantial question of law raised as follows. In view of the aforesaid discussion, we deem it appropriate and proper to treat 6.6 crores as consideration paid for sale of shares rather than a payment under section 28(2)(a) of the Act. The substantial question of law is accordingly answered in favor of the appellant revenue and against the respondent assessee, but holding that 6.6 crores was taxable as capital gains in the hands of the respondent assessee being a part of the full value of sale consideration paid for transfer of shares, the appellant revenue will be entitled to costs as per the Delhi High Court rules. Clearly, without any recorded reasons and without framing any substantial questions of law on whether the said amount could be taxed under any other provision of the IT Act, the High Court went ahead and held that the amount of 6.6 crores received by the SSC was received as part of the full value of sale consideration paid for transfer of shares and not for handing over management and control of CBDBL, and is consequently not taxable under Section 28(2)(a) of the IT Act. Nor is it exempt as a capital receipt, being non-compete fee, as it is taxable as a capital gain in the hands of the respondent assessee as part of the full value of sale consideration paid for transfer of shares. This finding would clearly be in the teeth of Section 260(a) subsection 4, requiring the judgment to be set aside on this score. Coming to the merits, the High Court found, no doubt, market price of each share was only 3 rupees per share and the purchase price under the MOU was 30 rupees. But the total consideration received was merely about 56 lakhs. What was allegedly paid as non-compete fee was 10 times more, that is 6.6 crores. The figure per se does not appear to be a realistic payment made on account of non-compete fee. D-horse and without reference to sale of shares, loss of management and control of CDBL. The assessee had attributed an astronomical sum as payment towards non-compete fee, unconnected with the sale of shares and hence not taxable. Noticeably, the price received for sale of shares, it is accepted, was taxable as capital gain. The contention that quoted price of each share was merely 3 rupees, namely price as declared of 30 rupees, is fallacious and off the beam. The argument of the assessee suffers from a basic and fundamental flaw which is conspicuous and evident. This finding flies in the face of settled law. A catena of judgments has held that commercial expediency has to be adjudged from the point of view of the assessee and that the Income Tax Department cannot enter into the thicket of reasonableness of amounts paid by the assessee. This court in CIT versus Walchand and Co. 1967 stated, it is open to the tribunal to come to a conclusion either that the alleged payment is not real, or that it is not incurred by the assessee in the character of a trader, or that it is not laid out wholly and exclusively for the purpose of the business of the assessee, and to disallow it. But it is not the function of the tribunal to determine the remuneration which in their view should be paid to an employee of the assessee. When a claim for allowance under Section 10(2)(15) of the IT Act is made, the income tax authorities have to decide whether the expenditure claimed as an allowance was incurred voluntarily and on grounds of commercial expediency. In applying the test of commercial expediency for determining whether the expenditure was wholly and exclusively laid out for the purpose of the business, the reasonableness of the expenditure has to be adjudged from the point of view of the businessman and not of the revenue. The aforesaid judgment was followed by this court in J.K. Woolen Manufacturers vs. CIT 1969, where the court said, as pointed out by this court in CIT vs. Walchand and Co. Private Limited, in applying the test of commercial expediency for determining whether an expenditure was wholly and exclusively laid out for the purpose of the business, reasonableness of the expenditure has to be adjudged from the point of view of the businessman and not of the Income Tax Department. It is, of course, open to the appellate tribunal to come to a conclusion either that the alleged payment is not real, or that it is not incurred by the assessee in the character of a trader, or it is not laid out wholly and exclusively for the purpose of the business of the assessee, and to disallow it. But it is not the function of the tribunal to determine the remuneration which in their view should be paid to an employee of the assessee. This court in CIT vs. Panipat Woolen and General Mills Company Limited 1976 stated as follows. Before coming to the facts, it may be necessary to mention that there can be no dispute with respect to the two important propositions. 1. That in order to fall within Section 10 subsection 2 clause 15 of the Act, the deduction claimed must amount to an expenditure which was laid out or expended wholly and exclusively for the purpose of the business, profession or occasion. This will naturally depend upon the facts of each case. 2. that in order to determine the question of reasonableness of the expenditure, the test of commercial expediency would have to be adjudged from the point of view of the businessman and not of the income tax department. Further, this court in Shahzada Nand and Sons versus CIT 1977 reiterated these principles as follows. It is well settled that these factors are to be considered from the point of view of a normal prudent businessman. The reasonableness of the payment with reference to these factors has to be judged not on any subjective standard of the assessing authority, but from the point of view of commercial expediency. What is the requirement of commercial expediency must be judged not in the light of the 19th century laissez-faire doctrine, which regarded man as an economic being concerned only to protect and advance his self-interest, but in the context of current socio-economic thinking, which places the general interest of the community above the personal interest of the individual and believes that a business or undertaking is the product of the combined efforts of the employer and the employees, and where there is sufficiently large profit after providing for salary and remuneration of the employer and the employees and other prior charges such as interest on capital, depreciation, reserves, etc., a part of it should in all fairness go to the employees. Also, this court in SA Builders Limited versus CIT 2007 held as follows. We agree with the view taken by the Delhi High Court in CIT versus Dalmia Cement Builders Limited 2002 that once it is established that there was nexus between the expenditure and the purpose of the business, which need not necessarily be the business of the assessee itself, the revenue cannot justifiably claim to put itself in the armchair of the businessman or in the position of the board of directors and assume the role to decide how much is reasonable expenditure having regard to the circumstances of the case. No businessman can compelled to maximize its profit. The income tax authorities must put themselves in the shoes of the assessee and see how a prudent businessman would act. The authorities must not look at the matter from their own viewpoint, but that of a prudent businessman. As already stated above, we have to see the transfer of the borrowed funds to a sister concern from the point of view of commercial expediency and not from the point of view whether the amount was advanced for earning profits. The same principle has also been cited with approval by recent judgment of this court in Hero Cycles Private Limited versus CIT 2015, where the court held as follows. Insofar as loans to the sister concern or subsidiary company are concerned, the law in this behalf is recapitulated by this court in SA Builders Limited versus CIT. After making note of and discussing on the scope of commercial expediency, the court summed up the legal position in the following manner. It has been repeatedly held by this court that the expression for the purpose of business is wider in scope than the expression for the purpose of earning profits. While CIT versus Malayalam Plantation Limited, CIT versus Birla Cotton Spinning and Weaving Limited, Birla Cotton Spinning and Weaving Mills Limited. In the process, the court also agreed that the view taken by the Delhi High Court in CIT versus Dalmia Cement Limited, wherein the High Court had held that once it is established that there is nexus between the expenditure and the purpose of business, which need not necessarily be the business of the assessee itself, the revenue cannot justifiably claim to put itself in the armchair of the businessman or in the position of the board of directors and assume the role to decide how much is reasonable expenditure having regard to the circumstances of the case. It further held that no businessman can be compelled to maximize his profit and that the income tax authorities must put themselves in the shoes of the assessee and see how a prudent businessman would act. The authorities must not look at the matter from their own viewpoint, but that of a prudent businessman. The High Court's next finding based on the judgment in Vodafone is as follows. In view of the aforesaid discussion and the findings on the true and real nature of the transaction camouflaged as non-compete fee, we have no hesitation and reservation that the respondent assessee had indulged in abusive tax avoidance. We may only reiterate it as correctly found by the majority judgments of the appellate tribunal that 1. A share of the face value of 10 rupees and market value of 3 was sold to 30 rupees as a result of control premium having to be paid. 2. It is important to note that each member of the family was paid for his or her shares in the company, the lion's share being paid to the assessee's son and wife as they held the most number of shares within the said family. The non-compete fee of 6.6 crores was paid only to the assessee. This was for the reason that stated in the deed of covenant, namely that Sri Shivraj Gupta had acquired considerable knowledge, skill, expertise and specialization in the liquor business. There is no doubt that on facts he has been CMD of CDBL for a period of about 35 years. That he also owned a concern, namely Maltings Limited, which manufactured and sold IMFL and beer, and that he was the president of All India Distilleries Association and HP Distilleries Association. It is further recorded in the judgment of the accounting member that the amount of 6.6 crores was arrived at as a result of negotiations between the SWC group and the appellant. That the restrictive covenant for a period of 10 years resulted in the payment of 66 lakhs per year, so that the appellant will not start or engage himself directly or indirectly or provide any service, assistance or support of any nature whatsoever to or in relation to the manufacturing, dealing and supplying or marketing of IMFL and or beer. Given the personal expertise of the assessee, the perception of the SWC group was that Sri Gupta would either start a rival business or engage himself in a rival business, which would include manufacturing and marketing of IMFL and beer, at which he was an old hand having experience of 35 years. As was correctly held by the second judicial member, it was also clear that the withholding of INR 3 crores out of 6.6 crores for a period of 2 years by way of a public deposit with SWC group for the purpose of deduction of any loss on account of any breach of MOU was akin to a penalty clause, making it clear thereby that there was no colorable device involved in having two separate agreements for two entirely separate and distinct purposes. The reasons given by the learned assessing officer and the minority judgment of the appellate tribunal are all reasons which transgress the lines drawn by the judgment cited, which state that the revenue has no business to second guess commercial or business expediency of what parties at arm's length decide for each other. For example, stating that there was no rationale behind the payment of 6.6 crores and that the assessee was not a probable or perceptible threat or competitor to the SWC group is the perception of the assessing officer, which cannot take the place of business reality from the point of view of the assessee, as has been pointed out by us herein above. The fact that Messrs. Maltings Limited had incurred a loss in the previous year is again neither here nor there. It may in future be a direct threat to the SWC group and may turn around and make profits in future. Besides, Messrs. Maltings Limited is only one concern of the assessee. It is the assessee's expertise in this field on all counts that was the threat perception of the SWC group, which cannot be second guessed by the revenue. Equally, the fact that there was no penalty clause for violation of the deed of covenant has been found by us to be incorrect given the letter dated 2nd April 94. The fact that the respondent assessee in his letter dated 26 March 98 in reply to the show cause notice had stated that the SWC group had gained substantial commercial advantage by the purchase of shares in CDBL as the turnover increased from 9.79 crores in the accounting period ending 31st March 91 to 45.17 crores in the accounting period ending 31st March 97 is again neither here nor there. As a matter of fact, the SWC group, due to its own advertisement and marketing efforts, may well have reached this figure after a period of 6 years. The date 30th September 95 is wrongly recorded by the High Court in paragraph 90. The correct date as per the letter dated 26 March 1998 is 31st March 1991, as has been pointed out by us herein above. It only remains for us to point out the judgment in Gufic Chem Private Limited versus CIT 2011. In this case, the question set out by the court is as follows. Whether a payment under an agreement not to compete, negative covenant agreement, is a capital receipt or a revenue receipt is the question which arises for determination in this case. Here, the court was dealing with an amount of 50 lakhs received by the appellant assessee from Ranbaxy as a non-compete fee under an agreement dated 31st March 97. This court, in negating the application of section 28 clause 2 subclause E to such receipt, held as follows. The position in law is clear and well settled. There is a dichotomy between receipt of compensation by an assessee for the loss of agency and receipt of compensation attributable to the negative or restrictive covenant. The compensation receipt for the loss of agency is a revenue receipt, whereas the compensation attributable to a negative or restrictive covenant is a capital receipt. The above dichotomy is clearly spelled out in the judgment in the case of Jailander's case 1964, in which the facts were as follows. The assessee in that case carried on business in diverse fields besides acting as managing agents, shipping agents, purchasing agents, and secretaries. The assessee also acted as importers and distributors on behalf of foreign principals and bought and sold on its own account. Under an agreement which was terminable at will, the assessee acted as the sole agent of explosives manufactured by Imperial Chemical Industries Export Limited. That agency was terminated, and by way of compensation, Imperial Chemical Industries paid for first 3 years after the termination of the agency 2/5 of the commission accrued on its sales in the territory of the agency of the appellant, and in addition in the third year full commission was paid for the sales in that year. Imperial Chemical Export Limited took a formal undertaking from the assessee to refrain from selling or accepting any agency for explosives. Two questions arose from determination in Jailander's case 1964, namely whether the amounts received by the appellant for loss of agency was a normal course of business and therefore whether they constituted revenue receipt. The second question which arose before this court was whether the amount received by the assessee as compensation on the condition not to carry on a competitive business was in the nature of a capital receipt. It was held that the compensation received by the assessee for loss of agency was a revenue receipt, whereas compensation received for refraining from carrying on competitive business was a capital receipt. This dichotomy has not been appreciated by the High Court in its impute judgment. The High Court has misinterpreted the judgment of this court in Jailander's case 1964. In the present case, the department has not impugned the genuineness of the transaction. In the present case, we are of the view that the High Court has erred in interfering with the concurrent findings of fact recorded by CET appeals and the tribunal. One more aspect needs to be highlighted. The payment received as non-competition fee under a negative covenant was always treated as a capital receipt till assessment year 2003-2004. It is only by the Finance Act 2002 with effect from 1st April 2003 that the said capital receipt is now made taxable. The Finance Act 2002 itself indicates that during the relevant assessment year, compensation received by the assessee under non-competition agreement was a capital receipt, not taxable under the 1961 Act. It became taxable only with effect from 1st April 2003. It is well settled that a liability cannot be created retrospectively. In the present case, compensation received under the non-competition agreement became taxable as a capital receipt and not as a revenue receipt by specific legislative mandate via Section 28 Clause 5A, and that too with effect from 1st April 2003 only. Hence, the said Section 28 Clause 5A is amendatory and not clarificatory. Lastly, in CIT versus Rai Bahadur Jairam Walji, 1959, it was held by this court that if a contract is entered into in the ordinary course of business, any compensation received for its termination, loss of agency would be a revenue receipt. In the present case, both CIT appeals as well as the tribunal came to the conclusion that the agreement entered into by the assessee with Ranbaxy led to loss of source of business. That payment was received under the negative covenant, and therefore the receipt of Rs 50 lakhs by the assessee from Ranbaxy was in the nature of capital receipt. In fact, in order to put an end to the litigation, Parliament stepped in to specifically tax such receipts under the non-competition agreement with effect from 1st April 2003. Hence, the said Section 28 Clause 5A is amendatory and not clarificatory. Just for clarity, reiterating the case of Rai Bahadur Jairam Walji here. In the present case, both CIT appeals as well as tribunal came to conclusion that the agreement entered into by the assessee with Ranbaxy led to loss of source of business. The payment was received under negative covenant and therefore receipt of 50 lakhs by assessee was in nature of capital receipt. In fact, in order to put an end to the litigation, Parliament stepped in to specifically tax such receipts under the non-competition agreement with effect from 1st April 2003. So, in the current Shaw Wallace Company Group case, the Supreme Court said, respectfully following the aforesaid decision, we allow the appeal and set aside the impugned judgment for all the reasons given by us above. All pending applications, if any, stand disposed of in terms of the judgment. So Sri Shivraj Gupta won this case in the Supreme Court, which finally held that non-competition fee was not taxable for assessment year 95-96, and it came into picture only from assessment year 2003-2004 onwards. Thank you for a patient hearing. In order to get more such videos, kindly subscribe this channel and click on bell button to receive new videos in real time. Please like the video in order to encourage to make more such videos.